Hello everyone. So today we are going to discuss a very important topic of our project, not of our project, but it is a generic topic which is needed in every type of project building. So first of all, we will think or discuss about the coding of REST API. That is, I will write the topic first, how to code REST API. This is the main agenda. Second one is how does the Spring framework works. This is the second agenda of our topic. So we have to discuss all the topics related to these two major topics. Okay. So before diving into the second topic, the Spring framework, it is the another topic. We will discuss it later or in the next demo. First, the topic for today is how to code REST API. So when we talk about our project, this is our project. This is the main backend integration system which we are building. This is the third party PHP. Okay. Let me write it once so that it becomes clear. Okay. So this is PSP or Stripe provider service. Okay, good. And this is backend integration system. Okay, good. Let me make it upward. Okay. So this is the backend integration system. So in this integration system, what we are building? We are building three microservices. Okay. So what we are building in services? In services, we are building the methods. If we call about in a generic way, it is an APIs. We are building a method. There are several methods in it. Methods. Okay. Here also some methods are okay. Let me make it a little bit big in size. Methods. Oh, good. Method. So this microservice wants to call another one. Suppose this want to call this method, or this microservice want to call this method, or there is an option where this microservice is calling this. So there are different. So this microservice want to call this. So this is calling this method. So there are different scenarios. There are different cases where the methods are being called from different places or from the external world. So here comes in concept of APIs. Let me write it down. We are going to how to code REST API. This is our topic. So the first thing arises, the first question is what is API? API is nothing. Just application programming interface. Now we have commonly heard the word interface. Interface is nothing but a structure or a skeleton or a framework which is given and its implementation is given by another class which we are discussing. So API is nothing, it is a generic method. It is a generic method. This method, this method is need to be called from outside or external world. So for this, we have to follow some standards while making it. And for this, we have learned so many standards like SOPA standard or REST standards. These are the standards which are going to use for building APIs. Basically, in the modern times, we are building through REST. REST is the representational state transfer. This is the basic understanding of API. API is nothing but a method. How method? Suppose we have one method int my method. There is two. It is taking two parameters int value one, comma int value two, and in this we write some business logic. Here we write some uh, global variable like int sum, and it is stated zero. It is declared with zero. Okay, so right there, and now we write some business logic for this. We will what we will do? We will add some. We'll add the value one plus value two, and it will be assigned to int sum. It will be assigned to sum, and this sum will be returned. So this is the method with now you have write the functionality, you have write the logic. This logic is generic, totally generic. You never know which value will come in the parameter, and you never know which value will come in the value. So this is like an interface which provides a framework, which provides a basic structure of the AP of the method. Now this method is need to be called from outside. Suppose you have written this method and in your code you need to add some two values like you have to add 13 or 12. What will you use? You will use my method, you will call 13 comma 12, and you will store the result in your local variable in result. So what will happen? My method will be called the flow of program. It is running. Suppose you have done some code here code is written, here also code is. So what will happen? The code flows like this. And when it reaches to this line, my method will be invoked. My method will be invoked. My method will be invoked with the parameter 13 and 12. 13 will be assigned to value 1. 12 will be assigned to value 2. It will, the business logic will run. After this, the business logic will run. So after calling the method, the value will be assigned to value 1, 12 will be assigned to value 2, the business logic will run, 13 and 12 will be added, it will sum up to 25, and it will assign to a variable sum. The sum will be returned. In this, my method will assign this value of sum to our local variable result, and we will do further business logic with that result. So the major advantage which we got that we don't have to worry about the business logic, what they have written. We just have to pass two parameters. They will do the business logic, they will do the processing, and we will get a result. The same thing will be happening with the API. API will have the same concept. API will provide us with some functionality. These functionality which we wrote, in our project should be called from outside. So what will we understand from this line? API will provide us with some functionality. These functionality which we wrote in our project should be called from outside. But we are doing, we are writing some functionality. And this is an external word which calling this functionality. Suppose here are two microservices. One is this and one is this. And in this microservice, we write some method. String my method. Okay, string my method. And we call with some parameters. We call this with some parameters. Okay. Now this is our functionality. This is not a functionality. This is an API. This will perform some processing. Now this is the external part. External role can be the user, can be the other service. It depends from the project to project, which end customer, end user, end service is calling the functionality. So this want to call our functionality. So it will call this. Now this calling is called an calling of APIs, or what we say API is being called API. Okay. So this my method is considered to be an as API. How it is made API? There are some annotations, there are some complexities which have to be added. Then this my method will be converted to an API. So we call so now we are calling it like a method. But when we talk about like our project or a Spring Boot project, we are calling an API. If they are operating on web, then it is known as web API. When these services are running on some web services, it is known as web API. No, these web API or REST API. Obviously, we are using some standards for making our API. These standards are known as REST. We all know it's very well. It is known as REST API. Now, when we are calling one API from the other service or an external one, there needs to be some protocol. There needs to be some communication channel. This communication channel is known as HTTP protocol. So in combined term, we can call it as REST over HTTP call. This is the major funda of API calling. So we need to write, we will sum it up. We need to write code to make REST over HTTP. So here the question arises why we are using HTTP. Now the HTTP is known as Hypertext Transfer Protocol. There are several protocols over which we can call the REST APIs. There are different protocols like HTTP, HTTPS. The major difference between HTTP and HTTPS is that HTTP is not secured. It is for local testing when you are operating your code in your local machine. Whereas HTTPS is secured and it ensures the authentication validation while calling. And there are certain others protocol like gRPC and socket, different. But HTTP is popular and majorly used. Now, why it is famous? Because we will do some conclusion for that. Here is the major advantage. It uses client server architecture. It is client, and this is client, and this is server. This is server. Okay. Now this server can be called as this service, and this client can be called as this microservice or external one. Now here comes an request. It will request or call the API or call the method. But in the HTTP terms, we will call it as uh, we will call it as request, not we call it as request. Here comes in request from client, and in the server will process this request and it will return the response. Whereas in API, it will return data in response, but here it is response. Response. And this the major thing which is operating between that. This is a communication channel which is known as HTTP, Hypertext Transfer Protocol. And this request is termed as HTTP request and it is HTTP. That is the technical terms, but in general, we can call it as a request and response. Now, this request and response can be used and can be taken as independent structure. Suppose there are different requests, multiple requests are coming. Each request and response structure are independent of previous and the incoming or the next request. This is a major advantage of while we use HTTP. Now, the next concept comes is we are calling REST API over HTTP. So, to code this, we need to work with multiple HTTP concepts. Obviously, if we are using some protocol, we have to abide their structure. We have to avoid their rules and regulations which they have stated for the REST API. So we will deal about that before diving into the REST API standards. Which are the concepts? This is the HTTP concept, which the every REST API call should abide while working. So these HTTP concepts are nothing but request, URL, request, method, status, code, request, headers, response, headers, and request, body, and the third is path variable. And we will discuss in path variable how we in the request. These are the major HTTP concepts which we have. Request URL. What is request URL? Suppose this is running on port number 808. This is running on 8080. So here will be some URL for it. What will be the URL? The URL will be http colon http colon local host colon 8083. So this is running on local host. Suppose on my machine on localhost 8083, and I want to call this method. So what will I will pass this request URL. I will pass this request URL in my request URL section. That will call that service. That will connect me to that service. Next, request method. There are several methods while working with HTTP, like get, post, put, delete, etc. These methods are used that what we are going to do. Suppose if we use get says that we have to retrieve or we want to retrieve data from this API call. Or post, we want to create some resource. We want to create or pass some data so that the resource to create on the server side or on that service on which we are calling our API. Put. Put is used to update the whole resource. Or the second method for updating is patch, which is used to update the partially. मतलब we do not update the full resource, but half resource. For that, we will use the patch. The status code. Status code is the response which changes. It could be 1xs, it could be 2xx, it could be 3xs, it could be 4xs, or another. So there are different codes. 1xs means, but primarily we use 2xs or 4xs. 4xx and also the 5xs. 5xs means 501, 502, 4xs means 401, 404 not found, 201 created, 200, okay. These are the status code which uh, tells us that what happens to our request. While HTTP, we send some request. As you know, we send some request. So we will get to know that what will happen. If 200, if we are creating some resources on the server side, the status code will be 201 created. If some response, if we pass some, yeah, you can say the wrong request, we occur with the, you can say the request structure or the client error. That is, that comes under the force access. And if we pass, you can say the correct data, and in the server side, the problem occurs. It will give back this 5xs status code like 501, 503 internal server error. That is the fix. These request headers and response headers, like they have to pass some basic auth, you can say authorization keys, passwords, you can say the content. These are the headers which are passed during the request and the response also. The request body. Request body is the data or the payload which are sent during the request. After all the programming is working on some data. So in request body, the data is sent. How we can say there are different ways of sending data, and these are like we can send data in JSON form, in form URL, encoded form URL, and in XML form and HTML. There are different. Also, there are different structures of passing, like URL, like the simple URL in which we have passed the parameters, and we also have the path variable concepts which we'll discuss later. So let me give the basic example which by which you can understand what are these concepts. I will open the Postman, it will have the summary of all that. Or we will do inspect over there. Of course, wait a second. Okay. So let me tell you what the major cases, and when you see that inspect, you come on network. Okay. So let me show you on post. Suppose this is an API which is running on my localhost 8080. The API endpoint is API/add. So what will happen? When I send the request, the result will come up. No, what we have discussed so far. This is the HTTP. Here you can see this is the HTTP type request, or we are calling our API using HTTP concept. So what was the first thing we have to need about the HTTP? That is, That is the URL. We want request URL. This is the URL, localhost and the endpoint. Okay, good. Second thing is request method. Are we defining the method get post put? Yes, we are defining post. We have using post request. Next, status code. Status code comes in response. So we will check it later. Request headers. Is there are some headers? Let me check. Yes, there are 8 headers. What are this? Postman token. This is something like you can say authorization key. Content type. Content type describes what are the type of data or in which type you are sending the data. Application JSON. We are sending data in JSON form. Here you can see we are sending data in JSON form. Okay, good. What are the other headers? There are several headers like encoding, connection. These are the basic headers which we are discussing. Next, request body. We are sending body in a JSON. Now, how the JSON form looks like? See, body, raw, JSON. This is the JSON. Key value pair and comma separated. So what we will do? We will call this API and we will study the response. Okay, I am calling. Okay, my service is not running. So my service is now up and running on port 8080 and we will call our API. Here we go. And we will get the result 25. Now you can see here, that is the status for 200. Request successful. The server has responded as required. This is the and also, but we are discussing there will be a request header, there will be a response header. Here you can see there is a response header. The response comes in JSON form. There will be timeout, and other things in the headers. So these are the basic HTTP concepts which we need to understand. Without this, we can't follow or we can't work with our project. Now we will understand the further things. What are the layered applications? Before diving into the working of Spring Boot, we need to understand one more concept that is layered application. What is layered application? Suppose we are building the project. Now the project is building on a framework. The framework is Spring Framework. Suppose this is a Spring Framework. Here is your client or the user, and here is your main backend system. In between, there is one framework, and the backend system is completely layered. Layered in the sense there will be a controller, there will be a service, and there will be a repository and other stuff. It is completely layered. Now, when the request comes, it will first go to Spring. Spring will handle it. Wait a second. Let me get correct. Okay. The request will be coming to Spring. Spring will handle it and deliver to the specific layer. So, what will understand it? It is Spring framework, right? Okay. So, layered applications state that we need to write our controller or what we can understand. Our entry point is controller, controller layer. All the requested, all the requests will first go to Spring and the Spring will redirect it to the specific controller. So the first layer will be this of controller. We'll write it down in short. The first is controller. Okay. Next, our entry point is control. We need to write our controller. Also, entry request cannot pass, else entry request cannot pass to your service. From controller, this request will be passed to the service. So from controller it will pass to service. We need to first write controller. So entry point is control. From control, the request is passed to the service link. This is service. Okay, let me make it big. Okay. From controller, the request will be passed to service layer, and the business logic will be happen in service layer. Now the service layer will decide whether the logic will be like that. We have to call the database, so the it will pass to the repository, and in which there will be an aspect oriented program, the interceptor will intercept, and the other stuff will happen. But the major thing is that entry point is controller. From controller, every request will be handled by the controller. Else, the request will not reach directly to the service. In controller, all the APIs will be returned. So the conclusion, the major conclusion which we get is that we need to write our own controller, else entry request cannot pass to your service. Okay, good. Let me make it in center. Yes, we need to write our own controller, else entry request cannot pass to our service. No, but when we talk about the layers, we have to make a Spring Boot application using layers. Now, what is this layers? Layers, Spring Boot application using layers. First is controller. That is, it will be the entry. Second, service. It will for business logic. Next, PAO or repository. It will for database. Okay. Now, for making our Spring Boot application using layers, we will have to decide the packages. Suppose the package is like base package. Under this base dot package dot controller type. All the controller will be in this package. Second, base dot package dot service. Service will be defined with interface and their child classes for implementation. Repository will be defined as interface and their implementation. In service package, we will define service interface package, service implementation. And that's all other stuff we'll discuss in the project making discussion or the code making discussion. Okay. Base dot package dot DA or representative. There are several other packages like Pojo and a model, DTOs, constant, and other things. But these are the major packages which we not need to know about the layer because these are the major layers. That's cool. Now the other conclusion which we have uh, come. The next conclusion is we will create a controller We need to receive the incoming request so that we can further process. We need to write a method for that. Okay, in controller, what will suppose there is it is your incoming request. Okay, in between there is Spring Boot framework and there is your controller. So we will create a controller. We need to receive this request. This request first comes in the Spring framework. The Spring framework will assign to this controller. Now we have to receive this incoming request so that we can further process it and return the response. So for processing, what we are discussing in that, in controller, there is some method. We need to write a method. This method is for processing. Our request is coming. We have to process, but we have discussed so far in previous time. There will be a method. Someone is calling. Not that. There will be some process and we have to return. So in this, we have to write one method. In controller also, we have to write one method and there will be some return type for it. There will be some parameter it will take. There will be some business logic for it. This business logic will call a service layer and repository. That is another stuff. But there will be some business logic for handling this request. This is the major thing we need to about the API. Okay. So there will be certain method or an API which this request structure will call. So this is the major stuff. I want to clarify that what is basically an API, in which standards we are working, that is the REST standard, and which concepts we are using, that is the HTTP concept. This is the theoretical part, which this is complete theoretical part about the HTTP concepts and about the API. And majorly, we discuss what is an API. In the next demo, I will covering that how the Spring how the Spring works on these HTTP concepts and how this request is handled by Spring and how this request is handled by our controller layer. This will be discussed in the next demo with the detailed coding and detailed examples. Because Spring says we have to use certain types of annotations like REST controller annotation, request mapping. I will discuss this later. And it says use certain annotation in certain ways so that this Spring framework can assign this request or map this incoming request to our method because there are several methods, there are several controls. So how does this thing move? Where to pass this request? There are several requests. How does this thing move? For that we have to use some kind of annotation. So that will be discussed in the next demo. Thank you.